The story of global power is not only written in treaties, wars, or speeches delivered at world forums. It is also told in the decisions of leaders who, despite being underestimated, choose to act boldly against the weight of history. Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso has emerged as one such figure. The youngest head of state in the world, a captain-turned-president, he carries the spirit of a generation unwilling to surrender to the dictates of foreign powers. His projects, initiated under conditions of poverty, instability, and external pressure, have reverberated far beyond his nation's borders. For the West, accustomed to dominance over Africa's economic and political trajectory, these initiatives have been unsettling, even trembling. To understand the gravity of this moment, one must look deeply into 10 defining undertakings of Traoré's leadership, each carefully crafted to challenge dependency, reclaim sovereignty, and redraw the map of Africa's future. When Traoré assumed power, Burkina Faso was staggering under the weight of jihadist insurgencies, economic hardship, and a loss of faith in state authority. Western governments had long presented themselves as indispensable partners in stabilizing the Sahel. France in particular maintained military bases. Foreign companies controlled mining revenues, and international institutions imposed fiscal rules that drained more than they restored. Traoré's first project was therefore not physical but conceptual. He set out to reorient the national psyche toward sovereignty. His speeches, infused with Sankarist rhetoric, carried the weight of history, reminding Burkinabe that no foreign army could secure their land if the people themselves were not empowered. He withdrew Burkina Faso from defense pacts that tied the nation's security to foreign approval, insisting that Africans must protect Africa. This departure from dependency was more than symbolic. It forced the West to reckon with the possibility that its military influence in the Sahel was no longer guaranteed. His second major undertaking was the recalibration of security itself. Recognizing that state armies alone could not withstand the wave of insurgencies, Traoré mobilized the volunteers for the defense of the homeland. This project brought ordinary citizens into the defense of their communities, an approach dismissed in Western capitals as unsophisticated, yet one that reconnected the state with its people. Critics warned of risks, but Traoré pressed on, believing that sovereignty demanded shared sacrifice. The West trembled at the thought of an African state bypassing their training programs, choosing instead to create its own defense doctrine. While not without flaws, this grassroots mobilization infused Burkina Faso with a spirit of resilience that foreign consultants could never manufacture. Economics was the next battleground. For decades, Burkina Faso's gold, cotton, and land had enriched multinational corporations while leaving its people impoverished. Traoré's third project struck directly at this imbalance, the renegotiation and, in some cases, outright cancellation of exploitative mining contracts. By demanding a larger share of profits for the Burkinabe state, he challenged the very structure of neo-colonial extraction. The tremor was immediate. Companies headquartered in Paris, London, and Toronto suddenly faced the prospect that their stranglehold over African resources was no longer secure. Traoré declared that natural wealth should benefit the people who lived upon the land, not distant shareholders. This assertion, simple in principle, was revolutionary in practice. It inspired debates across Africa about how much longer the continent would tolerate plunder disguised as partnership. The fourth project unfolded in agriculture, a sector often treated by foreign donors as a domain for small-scale charity rather than national pride. Traoré revived the Sankarist ethos of food self-sufficiency, encouraging communities to reduce reliance on imported staples. He redirected funds toward irrigation, seed distribution, and local cooperatives. Western agribusinesses that profited from exporting food to African markets watched with unease as Burkina Faso sought to nourish itself. By linking sovereignty to the ability to feed one's people, Traoré drew a line that resonated across a continent too often subject to hunger while sitting atop fertile lands. Education and ideological independence formed his fifth project. Traoré has repeatedly insisted that liberation is not merely about borders, but about minds. He invested in reforms aimed at promoting curricula rooted in African history, culture, and identity, rather than colonial narratives. Though modest in material scope, this initiative struck a nerve in the West, which has long used education systems to reinforce dependency. By cultivating pride in African heritage, Traoré aimed to produce a generation unwilling to accept inferiority. For Western powers accustomed to shaping African elites in their universities and training programs, this ideological shift was profoundly unsettling. His sixth project addressed the question of alliances. Rather than rely solely on traditional Western partners, Traoré sought deeper cooperation with non-Western powers, from Russia and China to Turkey and Iran. He framed these relationships not as replacements for colonial masters, but as opportunities to diversify Burkina Faso's partnerships. His embrace of multipolarity was itself a challenge to Western hegemony, signaling that Africa is no longer bound to a single orbit. This realignment, echoed by Mali and Niger, shook the architecture of Western influence in the Sahel. Where once the West assumed monopoly, now it found competition. The seventh project was regional integration. Traoré worked closely with Mali and Niger to form the Alliance of Sahel States, a new security and political bloc designed to coordinate resistance against both insurgents and external interference. For decades, Western strategies had thrived on dividing African states, ensuring they remained dependent and fragmented. By forging this alliance, Traoré not only defied France's regional dominance, but also created a model of African unity rooted in shared struggle. The West trembled because it saw the potential for this alliance to grow, perhaps extending into a broader federation that could negotiate on equal terms with global powers. The eighth project concerned the assertion of monetary independence. Traoré questioned the CFA Franc system, a colonial-era currency arrangement that keeps much of West Africa tied to France's financial apparatus. Though Burkina Faso has not yet abandoned the CFA, his government has opened debates and commissioned studies about alternatives. The very act of questioning the system threatened to unravel a mechanism that guarantees French economic leverage over its former colonies. This project remains in motion, but even its possibility sends shivers through Western financial institutions, for if the CFA collapses, the entire edifice of neo-colonial finance in West Africa may follow. Energy sovereignty formed the ninth project. Traoré recognized that no nation can be truly independent if it relies on others for its most basic needs. He prioritized investments in solar energy, recognizing Burkina Faso's immense natural potential for renewables. Unlike Western-led projects that often entrap nations in debt or prioritize export, his initiatives were oriented toward domestic use, ensuring villages and towns gain access to electricity. By asserting that energy should serve national development rather than foreign profit, he introduced a paradigm shift. For Western corporations eyeing Africa's energy markets, this insistence on self-reliance posed a direct challenge to their profit-driven models. Finally, his 10th and perhaps most significant project was the revival of dignity as a principle of governance. Traoré consistently frames his leadership as a continuation of the unfinished dreams of Thomas Sankara. He speaks of dignity not as abstract philosophy, but as the foundation of real policies, from refusing foreign dictates to demanding equitable partnerships. This insistence that Burkina Faso will not kneel, even if poor, even if embattled, reverberates like thunder across the continent. It trembles the West not because it immediately shifts material power, but because it signals the awakening of a spirit long suppressed. Dignity, once claimed, cannot be easily surrendered. Together, these 10 projects compose a tapestry of defiance and aspiration. Each is rooted in Burkina Faso's unique context, yet each also carries implications far beyond its borders. They reveal a leader who understands that sovereignty is not declared once, but built daily in the decisions that reject dependency. For the West, They are trembling not because Burkina Faso alone can dismantle centuries of domination, but because such projects multiply when others are inspired. Already Mali and Niger have echoed these steps. Across Africa, debates rage in parliaments, cafes, and streets about whether to follow Traoré's example. The tremor, therefore, is not confined to Ouagadougou. It is continental, perhaps even global. The West's discomfort stems from a deeper realization. Control is slipping. For decades, Africa was treated as a laboratory for foreign agendas. Leaders who resisted were eliminated, silenced, or bought off. Yet the emergence of Traoré suggests that a new generation is willing to risk everything for sovereignty. He is not naive. He knows the dangers: covert destabilization, economic sabotage, and even assassination are the tools historically used against African leaders who dare to defy. But his willingness to act regardless of the risks imbues his projects with power. As his tenure unfolds, it is uncertain how many of these projects will endure. Burkina Faso faces immense challenges: insecurity, poverty, climate shocks, and internal divisions. Yet the symbolic force of his initiatives cannot be understated. Even if imperfect, they represent a decisive break from resignation. They remind the world that Africa is not a passive object, but an active subject of history. And in that assertion lies the true reason the West trembles. It is not only about gold contracts renegotiated, alliances reshaped, or currencies questioned. It is about the return of an idea, the idea that Africa, once considered a pawn, can be a player. That a young captain from a small and besieged nation can command the attention of presidents and parliaments in Washington, Paris, and London. That dignity, reclaimed in Ouagadougou, can echo as far as New York, Moscow, or Beijing. These projects, therefore, are more than policies. They are declarations that the era of silent obedience is ending. History will decide whether Ibrahim Traoré becomes a fleeting symbol or a lasting architect of Africa's liberation. But already his 10 projects have shaken assumptions, inspired millions, and unsettled those who believed their dominance eternal. In that sense, the tremble of the West is not merely a reaction. It is an acknowledgement that something new has begun. And though small in material measure, Burkina Faso has once again, through the voice of a determined leader, forced the world to reckon with Africa's unyielding demand for sovereignty.